Hello and welcome. I'm absolutely delighted that you could join us today. We are very pleased with the attendance we have. If everyone who's registered joins us, we should have significantly over 100 people from numerous different countries and many different parts of the industry following this discussion today. My name is Simon Osborne. I am the CEO of IFI Global, which is a research and media house based in the City of London. Although we do a lot of stuff in the US as well, which is where I am today. One of our 4 publications is the NED, which is going to be focusing a lot on the governance of new and emerging asset classes, such as crypto and indeed ESG in the coming months and years. I'm going to give a short introduction, and then we are going to get into a panel discussion with Claire Cummings, Ilko Fiol, and Kieran McNamee. I'm just seeing whether this presentation kicks into gear, which it isn't at the moment. So I'll just carry on and hope it does. No, it's not kicking into gear. How annoying. So let me do the introduction of our 3 panelists. Kieran McNamee is the CEO of D Paradigm Capital, which is a regulated multi-strategy DeFi fund. He is also the co-founder of Binary Labs, which innovates and commercializes DLT-based SaaS solutions for blockchain. Before that, he spent 25 years in investment banking. Dr. Ilko Fiol is managing partner of Alpha Governance Partners, a financial services partnership focusing on risk governance in sustainability, blockchain, and fintech. And he is also an adjunct professor of financial ethics at the universities of Lausanne and Neuchâtel, and he worked in investment banking for many years before that. Claire Cummings is the managing partner at Cummings Pepperdine, advising hedge funds on law, tax, and compliance. Cryptocurrency advice is a core part of their offering. Cummings Pepperdine lawyers were amongst the first advisors in digital assets. So I don't know why. Again, this presentation I have is freezing, and so we could. Oh, hooray! It's just jumped into life. Absolutely extraordinary. So these are the 3 subjects that we are going to be covering today. We'll doubtless go off the beaten path into other areas too. You are all very welcome to use the Q&A button to send in questions. Please do that. We'll try perhaps and take the odd question as we go along, but we'll save probably 10 minutes at the end for those that we haven't been able to cover up until that particular point. I'm going to make a few brief comments about those 3 areas before we get into the panel. The first being on the subject of the lessons from the crash. It's worth making this point for those perhaps aren't aware of this, that this is the 4th crash that Bitcoin has been through to date. And in each of these cycles it goes through, it always ends up, at least to date, it always ends up higher. In 2011, it went from $2 to $32 and then back to 1 cent. In 2013, it went up to $260, then back to $50. In 2017, it went up to $20,000 and then back to $12,000. In November last year, it went up to $64,000, and just earlier this week, I see it's just under $20,000. Whatever else it is, it is clearly not a bubble. I mean, there's plenty of detractors for the whole crypto revolution who claim it is, and what happened this spring is, for them anyway, evidence of that. But bubbles are things that burst and then go away again, and the craze goes into something else. That's absolutely not, obviously, the case when it comes to crypto. Redemptions, I haven't seen much comment on this to date, and perhaps we'll get into this a little bit later on in the discussion. I think, given the embryonic nature of this industry, if it is an industry. I think the industry dealt remarkably well with the redemptions that would have taken place in the spring due to the crash. And when I think back to the hedge fund crash of 2008, the dramas of which went on for many years after that, in some cases, many, many years, even a decade, when you think about the amount of money that was wiped off crypto, over $1 trillion. I don't know how much of that was redeemed, but a lot of money was lost in a very short, only matter of weeks. The industry did very well. Of course, we all know about Celsius. So it's not perfect. Celsius did freeze redemptions, but as far as I'm aware, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, that's the only one that we know about at the Ned/IFI Global. Mainstream fund industry digital diversification is growing. There've been many announcements of diversification since the crash. Clearly, those things were being planned prior to it, but no one has shelved anything. No one's put anything on ice. No one's cancelled anything. Everything is continuing as originally intended. For example, just in the last few weeks, Aberdeen has announced having bought a stake in the digital exchange Archax. BlackRock plans a Bitcoin trust for investors. It's also linking its technology to Coinbase. This is quite a turnaround for BlackRock because its publicity-seeking CEO, Larry Fink, just a few years ago said that he thought the success of Bitcoin shows the popularity of money laundering. So things are moving on with BlackRock. Schroders has bought a stake in the digital manager Fortius. Charles Schwab has launched a synthetic ETF on cryptocurrencies. Fidelity has added Bitcoin to its retirement accounts. PayPal, I just saw this very recently, I see is getting into crypto. And of course, there are approximately, according to PwC, 300 crypto hedge funds. As I say, a lot of this has been announced. Those announcements have come along recently, and doubtless, if we were doing this in another couple of months' time, there would be many more similar such announcements. The digital infrastructure continues to be built at pace. We will also be talking about that in a second. Now, this is a particular area of interest for us. How can the industry develop a really durable governance structure that will keep the business developing in the way we all want it to develop? Especially, how can we will get into this in a few minutes, how can we develop governance structures that investors want and need, that's able to let them sleep soundly at night? Because there is, and doubtless many of you are aware of this, there is a bad actor problem. I'll just give you a couple of examples of that. I see the blockchain analytics firm Elliptic claims that over the last year, from July 2021 to July 2022, $100 million of NFTs were reported stolen over that 12-month period. And according to them, things are actually getting worse. Smart contracts sound absolutely fantastic, and doubtless in most cases they are, but they're only as good as the code that's used to create them. A poorly written smart contract can be exploited and is being exploited by hackers. In December 21, a hacker sold $31 million as a result of a poorly written smart contract. And just in July, hackers found a vulnerability in a chain swap smart contract and stole $8 million of crypto assets. That brings us on, of course, to the question of regulation. I'm delighted you got Claire for that, because regulation is growing, and what kind of regulation is needed, is required to stamp that kind of thing out as much as possible. It's worth making the point, Kieran said this in our prep call, this is the first crash to have occurred since DeFi got going. I'll be very interested in his observations on that. Crypto-directed challenges. There is an issue as this thing grows and develops in finding qualified directors. We will get into this in a few minutes. that is a big issue. I note that, again, PwC, the firm that does, I think, the most comprehensive surveys on this business, noted in their last survey in late 2021, the independence on crypto fund boards, I think this is primarily hedge fund crypto fund boards, actually had gone down from 42% 2 years before to 38%. Of course, over that 2-year period, a lot more funds had been launched, but it is worrying that the majority of the board is not independent, or there's any independence at all, and it's plateauing at best, if not declining, is a bit of a concern. Why is that? I suspect it's largely because it's probably difficult for people to find independent directors who can add value. Again, we very much are going to get into that subject, obviously a subject of particular interest to the NED. Finally, before getting to the panel, I'll just mention in passing the NED's crypto plans over the coming months. We are going to set up a crypto investment governance forum. All our subscribers are welcome to join that. It will be manifested through online discussions for subscribers, and we will consult with people, and they're very welcome to come in and use our research department to ask questions that hopefully that we can answer. And through that governance forum, we will be launching an investor research study on the governance structures that I just touched upon a few minutes ago. What kind of governance structures realistically and practically can be put in place to keep investors, the different types of investors that are investing in this emerging asset class, happy. So we will go into the field with that later on this autumn, and I emphasize that we are first and foremost a research firm before we are a media firm, so hopefully we're reasonably well qualified to do that. We also, as a business, are going to be expanding very considerably into podcasts, and we hope to be building our podcast library of interviews with the great and the good in crypto, and indeed other areas of the business that we touch upon too. And finally, Selection Intelligence Service. That's a service we launched now well over a year ago to help managers, different types of managers in different asset classes, find independent directors, or find mancos or service providers, or indeed help them with finding the right jurisdiction to domicile their fund. And we're very much trying to develop a capability for that for crypto as well. So that's enough from me. Let's get on to the panel. So I'm going to ask them first to make some brief, broad observations on what they've heard, and then we're going to get into various areas we discussed. Kieran, you are coming up first on the screen for me. Have you got any broad observations on what you've heard in terms of particularly the crash or the other things I just touched upon?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Yeah, I'll pick up on the point you made around, the catalyst for this crash. It was very different to previous crashes, where this was very much driven by what I call the DeFi capital markets or digital capital markets that have been built over the last 2.5 years. And, the result of this, the cause was really over leverage and concentration risk, with the resulting fallout, from contagion. But having said that, and there were quite isolated cases and bad actors that created this crash. But having said that, we can't forget the amount of infrastructure that has been built around DeFi capital markets in terms of instruments, in terms of exchanges, DEXs, SEXs, the ability to hedge, even down to the various opportunities to generate income from staking, from liquidity pools. So a huge amount of infrastructure and product and instruments have been built in the DeFi space over the last 2.5 years. So when you get this over exuberance in using those instruments and the concentration around the different players, and not enough research to look at where that concentration is and proper risk management tools around it, that is something that has to be improved going forward. Also, one must note that the underlying infrastructure itself, in terms of layer ones, continued to develop and grow in terms of scalability, security, scalability, interoperability, even the layer 2 solutions on top of the layer 1s in terms of roll-ups, etc. All of this is a huge amount of progress in terms of developing a core infrastructure for digital capital markets.
Thank you. Claire, can I come to you? What have you got any broad observations before we get into the specifics on the areas I touched upon?
Yes, I think I'll just quickly, first of all, wholeheartedly agree with Kieran on the development of the sort of the wider ecosystem, in particular the layer 1 protocols. There, I think we're seeing particularly exciting movements towards dealing with issues such as latency, but also dealing with security. And that's always going to be a difficult one because, you know, the issue of security is not necessarily one of regulation. That's about crime. As far as regulation goes, and we've talked about that briefly, and in terms of governance, I would say that I'd just briefly say two things. First is that even if there is no direct regulation of certain types of crypto assets and the activities with them, and with some there is, some there isn't. But even if there isn't, don't forget that there is, however, a whole body of law, both legislation and case law, common law, that backs up what people do, how they do it. So there are always sort of criminal sanctions available. And the UK courts have demonstrated their eagerness to make sure that the UK is not seen as somewhere that criminal activity can be got away with. The judiciary has been very quick at granting immediate hearings, and have been very sensible, I think, in my view, in some of the sentencing they've handed down, and in particular the options, the requirements they're starting to put on exchanges and so on. Then the other thing I would just say about regulation is, again, don't forget that we do have regulation from all the existing financial instruments and activities that are already in place that are not crypto. So there is a framework on which to build. So far, when it's come to crypto, the emphasis really for the FCA has been on looking at the money laundering regulations and counterterrorism financing, which I think makes sense. But we're now seeing much more on financial promotion rules, and e-money as well. And there's no doubt that the FCA has said that it wants crypto to be key to what it gets up to. That's in its most recent business plan. But it's also, issued warnings. There was a warning back in March that they gave, and more productively, they are trying to work hard to work with people within the Innovation Hub and the Sandbox.
Thank you. Again, Ilko, can I come to you for some brief, broad introductions before we get into the specifics of where we are today?
Yeah. Thanks, Simon. The recent crisis, I mean, you mentioned Bitcoin, but I would also like to appeal to the crisis around Terra Luna and markets that went down over the summer dramatically. In my mind, showed that we are lacking governance. The topic of today, we're lacking the amount of governance, and we're lacking the quality of governance. And those entrepreneurs in this space that started out some years ago, a few of them were, of course, looking into governance, and I think. What we've seen now with so much value being destroyed, in my mind, also a bit unnecessarily, that governance going forward is taken more serious, not only to avoid, let's say, legal proceedings, but also to gain from adoption, acceptance, and growth of any protocol that people want to put forward, be it DeFi, CeFi, Layer 1, etc. And so I think there's an opportunity here for those who want to adopt, who want to grow, to think about how do we do governance in a pre-regulation stage. So where regulation is now coming in, and I liked Claire's point here, we do have legal frameworks, we do have concepts already out there around fiduciary management, which we can apply already now. So that people are ready when regulations are coming in. As I say, not only from a negative point of view, i.e. avoiding certain negative measures from regulators, but also in living up to aspirations of growth and adoption as well. And I think that's the good thing that comes out of it.
I'm glad you.
I think
Sorry,
Claire,
go on.
I was going to say, I think as well, it's fair to say there's been a slight sea change in mindset recently. There has been, I would say, a definite move from mindset of the very early days. I'm talking sort of 9 years ago. Crypto being something very bad, very terrifying. You know, it's dark web, everything. So people are seeing that actually crypto can be a credible alternative in the financial world and can be also a force for good. So I think that Ilka, what you were saying about that sort of the positivity, I think that we're seeing a change in the way people think, and they're now starting to think, you know what, yeah, actually this is really positive, this is good. And a much more sort of buoyant, sort of almost emotional approach to crypto, not one of fear.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, I'd like to come back to that. This is really, really, really interesting. I'm going to jump in because I want to keep that discussion. I love that comment of Ilko's governance in a pre-regulated state. We'll come back to that. Before we do that, can we just spend a few minutes going through what has happened in that period on from early May until early July, whatever it was. It was a 2-month hiatus of some extraordinary degree. A lot of people are out there. By the way, one of the questions I'd like to put to you, Ilko, you and I touched on this a little while ago, particularly this negativity from the European Union, especially from the ECB and especially from the French on the whole digital asset revolution. Do they consider this to be a threat to monetary union, European monetary union perhaps? But all the naysayers came out and said, you know, Bitcoin and the other digital currencies will go to zero. It's just a string of code, et cetera, et cetera. Kieran touched upon why he thought this happened. Can I ask you, or maybe come to you first, Ilko, what the lessons you take away from what happened over the spring, early summer?
So just now I mentioned the Terra Luna debacle and the immediate outflow, 3 Arrows Capital and Celsius and so on out of that. And I must say that when I saw that happening, I was a bit irritated because I was thinking, so you sit on top of an algorithmic stable coin and somehow you don't understand how collateral or liquidity risks come about. How on earth is anybody who sits on top of an entity that manages or develops these kind of products, both from an execution perspective as well as a supervisory perspective, including the regulator, allows this to happen? And the thing is that if you think back, anybody who's been in the hedge fund space, for example, and I've been there as well, many years, we remember the time that we had synthetic ETFs. And so we already had exposure or derivative strategies. We already had exposures which were built on algorithms, which were built on assumptions, let's say, and we managed those anyway. And so apparently, even though we are in an unregulated space, the people who are involved in these things have no serious consideration for these kinds of risks. Now, it also means, of course, that if you are an investor in those kind of situations, you also need to adapt your due diligence requirements. And we're going to speak about, directors and so on later on, I'm certain. But what that means for, as I said, due diligence, fiduciary duties, how you exercise those, et cetera, et cetera. So it's in my mind, as I said previously, it is the magnitude of the crisis in my mind was not necessarily needed to what we have seen. And so I think investors now are very wary. They're holding back, especially those that have a little bit more distance to the space. And there are a lot of good initiatives which are suffering in the short term of that risk-averse attitude. But I'm with Kieran. I mean, this is going forward. Industry is developing. It is at lightning speed. And if you were a fan of Ether before the crisis, and now that we're moving in the next couple of days and week into proof of stake, why would you not be a fan of Ether now, even though that the price came down, right? So there's a lot of positive things happening as well. Kieran,
you touched upon in your opening comments some observations on the crash. but you're the one person on the panel here today who's actually really in the business. You're at the coalface. I'd love to hear your observations from being at the coalface of what happened this spring. How was it a little bit different from how you anticipated your spring was going to be this year?
Yeah, not the ideal time to launch a fund, I can say, but having stress tested the strategy and come out the other side and weathered the storm, yeah, there are a lot of lessons, I think, that we need to consider going forward. From my perspective, and from a governance perspective, one of the biggest failures was around risk management, as Elko has pointed out. And this is where we need to bridge the gap between traditional risk management structures and frameworks and bring that to the digital world. You know, any portfolio management oversight would ensure, with good governance principles and a risk management perspective, that there isn't concentration risk. And what we saw within the DeFi capital markets over the period was very much concentrated risk across parties, which with proper due diligence, proper research, proper risk management frameworks should not have happened. You know, we've seen some funds that have fallen over. One particular fund, I believe, had 90% exposure to Terra Luna. You know, how could a board oversee such concentration risk? So, we need to take the traditional risk management framework and then adapt it to the digital requirements and the differentiators in the digital world versus the traditional capital markets. Things like looking at risk at a you know, a layer one protocol level, looking at risk per smart contract, risk per DEX, SEX. All of this breakdown of the component parts needs a very thoughtful, customized risk management specific to the digital markets. So there's real benefits in bringing together the expertise of risk management from the traditional world into the digital world and adopting that as a fit for purpose risk management thing that will we need to look at more closely going forward.
That's a fascinating thing, customized risk management. One of the things, perhaps we should save this for later on in the discussion when we talk about directors, but are there enough people around to be able to do that? This is always the concern, because as has been made, the point's been made already in this discussion, the technology is moving so fast. How many people are qualified to do this kind of thing?
I think there's very few. Sorry, carry on, Claire.
No, after you, Kieran. You're the coalface. I think you're going to be more interesting.
Yeah, no, that's one of the challenges we faced across the board in terms of resourcing the fund from the different functional areas, is to try and find people that have you know, worked in the traditional markets and structured governance structures, but also to appreciate some of the nuances within the digital space. And it's really underpinned, everything you do at the different layers is technology driven, and is trying to find those people with technology expertise, you know, to understand the nitty gritty of layer one protocols, the nitty gritty of smart contracts, the nitty gritty, you know, there's so many different levels, the nitty gritty of tokenomics, and every layer of the tech stack within digital ecosystem involves technology. So that will really involve a lot of the expertise really coming up the technology curve.
Okay, Claire, I'm going to switch now into governance structures, and by dumb luck, if it's the right way of putting it, a question has come in, which I will read out as we've just got it in. I'm going to give it to you, and please others, Ilko and Kieran, chip in as well, which is, how can investors, regulators, etc., keep up with all the technological developments taking place in the digital world? And if they cannot, is it safe to invest in this emerging asset class? Claire, do you want to have a go at that? Can you hear me? Claire, is Claire frozen?
It looks
like she may have frozen. Ilko, do you want to have a go at that?
Yeah, sure. So if you compare this to to the early stage of hedge funds, these were strategies that proliferated in all directions, and it was difficult to keep up, let's say. And over time, we got training available. People had their first experience. They jumped from one fund to the next, or to a regulator maybe, or to a service provider. And so the training and experience actually also increased over time. So I think that one answer to is, in what I call, as I said, what I call a pre-regulation situation is to say, well, if I think about fiduciary duty, which in your side of things, in common law, is very well defined, prudence, care, loyalty, and those, how is this being implemented in a crypto or /blockchain investment setting? And so you should ask yourself these questions before you invest. That's one. Second, in terms of oversight in directors, this is clearly not, if you have to rely as an investor on directors representing you in a structure like that, you would need to understand what kind of directors are there, how are they representing me? And maybe these are not the same directors that a fiduciary services shop would give you for free when you take something else of services, as you find in some of the major fund domiciles. Maybe those directors they are somewhere else, and then maybe they look differently. Maybe they are in places where you would not suspect them. And so we'll talk about that in a moment, I'm certain. And so is it safe to invest? You need to, in my mind, and by the way, I also have dirt on my face. I've been on boards of these entities since 5-6 years. I've personally invested in this stuff for a long time. So I've also, had gained some experience. Is it safe to invest? There's going to be a remaining residual risk with this. That's clear. Invest in stuff that you think that you can understand as well. So don't pick a coin which is number 1,000 on the coinmarketcap.com, right? Very difficult to judge unless you know the project. You may want to choose a certificate instead, and also keep your hopes low. I.e., it is a large chunk of speculation. If it goes well, that's great. If it doesn't, don't invest money that you need for your retirement, let's say, or for your early use. For retirement, maybe you have time, so you can still wait till Bitcoin comes up again. So I think that it is seen as a speculative investment, high risk investment. We don't have enough metrics around it yet. It's all still under development.
Before we go on to Kieran, I want to come back, since we're on the subject of investment governance here, to a certain extent, come back to a point you made earlier, Ilko. You talked about governance in a pre-regulated state. And you sit on boards and you say you've been doing this now for a good number of years. I'm going to ask Kieran the same question in a second. What realistically, in practical, realistic terms, seeing the world as it actually is, not how we would wish it to be, what can be done today to put the governance structures in place to reassure investors?
Yeah, so I'll give one short example, and then I'll let Kieran also speak, of course. I'm asked to sit on a board. I have a couple of sort of requirements where I say I need to know what's going on. I need to be kosher. I need to be listened to. I need to be heard. Let's say, and the focus, of course, is to make the business better and make it grow. And typically, that's being agreed upon. And then when I come in and I see stuff, then I would start asking questions. How do we do KYC? And the computer scientists would look at me and say, "What do you mean KYC?" And I said, "Well, you don't want your platform or you don't want your token to be abused, right?" And so we need to build in something around KYC. That's what I'm saying. There are principles out there which you can already look into and implement after mapping out processes and what have you, as if you were regulated, let's say. And that's what you can do. KYC, AML, conflicts of interest, proper risk management. And mind you, if I say proper risk management in such a setting is particularly different. So, okay, so what do you do around cyber risk? How do you know that the tech stack is reliable? Did you get it? Did you get an assurance firm signing it off, et cetera, et cetera? So there's stuff in there that common sense would do, However, it's not the same per se as op risk, market risk, and credit risk, those categories that we are sort of used to.
Okay.
Kieran?
And Kieran, can I put the same question to you? Durable, practical, knowing how the world is, not how we, when I've asked these kind of questions in the past, not necessarily in crypto, people come up with a lovely wish list of things that we know in the real world aren't going to happen within any foreseeable period of time. In practical, realistic terms, what can be, if anything, done to build on the governance structures that we have today?
Yeah, I think you have to take it one by one across compliance, risk management, operations, regulation, etc. There is a lot being built in terms of tools. If we just pick up on Elko's point around KYC, AML, you know, at the end of the day, the underlying DLT blockchain is a great tool from a KYC AML perspective in terms of tracking the provenance of a token. There are tools, there are companies out there that can do that and provide that service. In terms of KYC, AML, onboarding of clients, there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of new companies that are emerging that are providing tools to help with the onboarding of clients, which will make the governance and oversight of that process a lot easier going forward. So a lot of that is in motion. A lot of that is being built and is starting to permeate its way out as products that institutions can engage to help with their oversight and monitoring process. From the point of view, say, from governance, from an operational perspective, we're seeing, you know, a lot more digital asset service providers in terms of their enhancing their offering from a digital asset custody perspective. You know, we have the first movers, the digital asset service providers, and they've made a lot of progress over the last year, year and a half with a lot of investment in terms of the capability that they provide. Still needs governance and oversight, asking the right questions in terms of insurance of digital assets, insurance of operational failures. But in terms of the technology itself, there is greater governance structures around the safekeeping of digital assets. And I only see that improving. So it's really for the fiduciary responsibility of directors and independent directors to really undertake practical due diligence and asking, just like you would in the traditional world, asking all the pertinent questions around the safekeeping of assets, the security, and the frameworks and the governance frameworks in terms of the movement of those digital assets. And even then down to the composition of boards themselves, having the right composition of directors that complement each other in terms of skill sets, where you might have one director that has a good understanding of the digital space. You know, from a practical terms, coming back to that point, you know, take one specific example, setting up of digital wallets. If you're doing direct custody yourself, which is quite popular now amongst a lot of funds in setting up that they want to control their assets, and there's software or there's providers that provide technology or software as a service in order to do direct custody. But as part of that process and the governance in that process, and this is what we've seen that has been executed very well from our independent directors, is the whole process and governance around the wallet opening ceremony, ensuring that every step is absolutely followed to a proper set out procedure, that the wallet opening ceremony and ongoing maintenance of those processes is carried out to protect the safekeeping of assets. So they're just a few examples of the practicalities around some of the core governance areas that are developing very rapidly.
Well, thank you for that. And I'll be coming back before we do our research with investors. We'd love to pick your brains on some of the questionnaire. We'll talk about that sometime later this month or in October. I'd like to move on to the subject of, and you touched upon it again just then, Kieran, independent directors and boards. Very conscious of the time. By the way, questions are absolutely pouring in. I'm delighted to see them pouring in. So what I think we'll do is we'll try and spend a few minutes focusing on fund boards or boards, and not just for funds, boards and directors, and then we'll try and tackle the many questions that are pouring in all in one go at the end. So can I ask, I mean, Ilka, I'm sorry we seem to have lost Claire. I'm sorry she hasn't come back. Hopefully she will come back, but we'll plow on anyway. I said in my introduction, Ilko, that maybe, and it's just a guess, that the reason why there aren't more independents on the boards of any, oh, great, looks like Claire, fantastic, Claire, looks like you're back, great. I'll put this question to Ilko, then I'm going to put it to you, may well have some comments on this. Why aren't there more independents sitting on boards for any of the entities in the crypto business? Ilko, and then Claire.
So, yeah, in my mind there is, and rightfully so, there's some conservative approach, let's say, for sitting on a board of these kind of entities, because it is difficult to judge. You're not necessarily, is the whole of experience that you have from the hedge fund space, even though you would bring it, or from other structures for that matter, enough to understand and judge the risks that you have in your crypto investment or any other blockchain type of investment vehicle. So that's certainly one thing. Second is that those ventures are, they start out small, similar to new hedge funds. And so you are a director, you are tasked with oversight, and there's a lot that you're being asked to do, but the compensation is pretty low as well, because they can't afford it yet. So they got this mismatch there. And I picked up actually from one of the questions there as well, that was put in the Q&A. So that I think is an issue. The big drawdowns that we've seen scares people off, of course, and that is something that you don't want to be held liable for as well if you are in on a fund board there. So I think that overall there's not enough people that are found, let's say, to be on board. I think there are some out there which are not found, and we'll speak about that in a sec. But then also it is the compensation for the work and for the risk is likely also not there yet.
Claire, can you got some comments on that? We did touch upon the dearth of good quality independent directors in our prep call the other day. So any thoughts on this? We
did, yes. Sorry, but we were just talking about technology, weren't we? And then my technology completely failed. So apologies, thank you for having me back in. I think that, as we were saying the other day, Simon, it's a perennial problem, really. There are a good number of people out there wanting to be non-exec directors, but there aren't, not all of those who are out there really are are really up to scratch. And then those where you do find they're good, then they have to, inevitably, if they're any good, they will. And if they're in Cayman, they have to stop at a certain number, because if you're going to do the job well, you have to stop at a certain number. So that already makes the pond a bit smaller. And I think then you add on top of that everything that Ilka says, yes, you've got that as well. Where I do think there's a glimmer of hope, though, is that what I've found in my work is that there is a there is a great understanding amongst the youngsters of the crypto world that if you've been in hedge funds for a while, commodity trading, brokerage, so things that, were now, I can't quite believe, are called traditional finance, that there are a lot of things there which are with us, Ilka, we're both old enough, yeah. So there are skills there that are so valid and so core and so fundamental that if you get somebody who's doing it right, then they can learn to a certain degree. Where they can't learn, I think if they're within a good team, they'll be able to learn from the rest of the team. Yeah,
I think the point that Kieran made about complementary skill sets is very important as well. I think we've only got 15 minutes left, and I haven't really been looking at these questions as they come in. Let's try and tackle as many of these as we can in the time we've got. We did the first one already. Let me go to the second one. Does the panel foresee that DLT will disrupt the governance chain for funds, auditors, paying agents, mancos, risk reporting, compliance, etc.? Will they all become dinosaurs? Kieran, you're an ideal person to put that question to.
I just think it's a different paradigm, and in terms of the overall ecosystem and the benefits of blockchain distributed ledger technology, the core attributes or functionality and the benefits that we're achieving from blockchain is the ability for high transaction volume over time, transparency, etc. And I think, this just moves the participants in the ecosystem to different roles. At the end of the day, if you have a stock exchange that, or say up to now, we've had in traditional finance, say prime brokers that might net transactions and the net of a transaction through a stock exchange. What we conceivably can have is through greater technology underpinning a decentralized exchange is all the transactions going through the exchange, micro transactions, which then gives greater transparency, which then gives greater oversight to see all the transactions and the full picture. So therefore, the locus and quantum of risk at any particular time actually is more transparent because you can see all the activity going through central points. So there's a lot of benefits, and I know that there's a lot of different infrastructure groups moving into this space in terms of looking at the execution side, in terms of best execution and all of that, but also from the settlement process. So I think we really have an opportunity with DLT to really build a more transparent, a more open, higher volume, more regulatory oversight, more auditability, etc., that all the actors can still continue to participate, but in a different role in the new paradigm.
Yeah, I think it gives the opportunity for improvement. That's, I think, the way to look at it, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to try and rattle through these questions, and if maybe I'll point it at one person, but if anyone wants to comment as well, please do, because I'm very conscious that the short amount of time we've got left. The next question I'm going to abbreviate. Just the person raises the question about fund domiciliation for crypto funds. Has anyone got any observations on how do you compare the jurisdictions open to crypto funds in terms of governance and what they look for and require? Is there any particular jurisdiction that's taking up the cudgels for crypto in any particular way, that's taking the lead? I haven't seen that, but I should, but I haven't necessarily. Anyone got any comments on that?
Well, I think Cayman is still, as people term it, the jurisdiction of choice, but the BVI has sort of come along and went in there early to sort of to battle for it. I still think, though, that there are some elements which are back to this old, hedge fund TradFi thing, which, AIFMD, where is your fund? That's an element to it. How much of your fund is in crypto? So is it possible even to have a UCITS? So that, then you're going to be into the EU. But I think the key problems really for funds, and Kieran, this is probably something you can talk about as well, the administration and banking.
Yeah, in terms of ourselves, we've set up a Cayman domiciled fund overseen by SEMA and a BVI Manco. Ideally, we would have gone to Dublin or Luxembourg in terms of being able to have an AIFM, but it just wasn't practical in terms of looking to get an early mover advantage into the space. We found in terms of setting up administrators and banks, yes, it was hard work initially. We really had to start with one financial institution and then go to another and then add others. So we have more banking relationships that we don't have any risk concentration with one banking relationship should they decide to close down. In terms of fund administrators, yes, again, we're seeing more fund administrators coming into the place, particularly in Cayman. We're seeing an ability to appoint an administrator, ones that they're really coming up the curve in terms of being able to offer administration services, embracing the technology that they need in order to scrape pricing, in order to pull data, in order to present that data, to get clean data, to be able to present, to compile the NABs. Now, they are in a learning curve as well, but if we take Cayman, for example, there's a lot of progressive fund administrators that are really embracing digitalization and really building their service around some of the nuances that are required to service a digital asset hedge fund. Because at the end of the day, we would be the more sophisticated end of the spectrum, because we're actually buying, holding, and sweating a digital asset. So it's not like you're doing arbitrage in and out every day. It's the securities financing, prime brokerage, collateral management and going across a number of protocols and exchanges and DEXs and all of that kind of stuff. So that is a real challenge for fund administrators, and comes back to the point, that balance between service providers being able to provide the technology for administrators to do their jobs, and then finding the administration resources that understand the ecosystem to be able to review the data and produce the NAVs. So it really is still very early stages, but there's huge, again, I would go back and say there's huge progress being made in terms of evolving the technology to support their service provision, but also the individuals in coming up the learning curve.
The next one I want to give to you, Ilko, because a thought just occurred to me with this question I'm about to read out, because you are connected with universities and you act as a NED on various crypto funds. So the question is, just to add to a comment made by Kieran, read the directors, I act as a NED to various crypto funds and blockchain foundations. We use technical independent consultants from the likes of Imperial College to advise us as board members on the more technical aspects of the developments. This gives us a high level of governance on an independent basis. That sounds like an excellent idea, because this comes back to the point of the lack of expertise. And you are already an adjunct professor at various universities. Maybe that's the way to go, to get these universities plugged into this.
Yeah, that's right. I think so. Stuart making an excellent point, and it's also the experience that that I've made. Go to places where you will find this knowledge, that both technical knowledge as well as governance knowledge. I mean, in this, if I say technical knowledge, you're looking at programming languages, you're looking at the protocols themselves, and there are a number of schools. Very often, those layer one foundations are associated with a number of research projects within universities globally. They give grants to these people and so on. So you will find a lot of knowledge there. And then, as I say, the governance aspect of it, i.e. how does governance work in certain protocols, in certain coins, and how is it designed? So the judgment around the white paper, the tokenomics, the inflation that's being used, power distribution, voting rights, and so on and so forth. So what does governance mean in those protocols of those coins itself? You will find these people. Universities is one. Also areas where there's a lot of development. I sit in Switzerland, so you can imagine in and around Zug, the crypto valley, there's a big talent pool there. But not only Zug, you will also find it in other not so obvious places like Berlin or anywhere else where people are developing crypto and blockchain. And that is different, as I said before, from the traditional fund domiciles, which of course have skills from a different perspective, i.e. knowing local regulation, experience with fund administration and these kind of things. But it needs to be this complementary skill that I think Kieran discussed earlier that you need to get. So Stuart is spot on. And one more topic, one more thing around this is that if you're looking for technical assurance, yes, you will have to look at what the big four are offering. And some offer more than others. There are some liability concerns with some of the big four, but you will also find by now a number of firms out there which are specialized in technical assurance around blockchain, around smart contracts, and so on, which you can also tap. And these are not necessarily part of the big four, but you will find them. Chainalysis is a well-known, CipherTrace is a well-known one, and you will find others as well. So people around these kind of what we nowadays call ecosystems may also be good people to help drive a blockchain or a crypto business forward from a governance perspective.
Thank you. We're almost out of time. I think what I'm going to do is, sorry to those of you whose questions we haven't got to, I'm going to pick one big broad brush one and ask the three of you to conclude with the big broad brush question that is here, which is, what is the because I think, you know, we can lose the sort of the forest from the trees, wherever the expression is, when you get into all the technical details. But let me ask you three to quick sum up, quick answer to this question to finish with. What is the likelihood that a cryptocurrency could challenge the dominance of a traditional currency? Don't all speak at once, very quickly. Claire, go on.
Not for a long time. They are an alternative. That said, with inflation and interest going where they are, I think that will strengthen the use of cryptocurrencies, and people start to see the value of them.
Yeah, of course, they were supposed to be a hedge against inflation, and then, you know, when inflation started zooming up, they all crashed. But anyway, both Ilko and Kieran, what are any observations on that to finish with?
Yeah, I don't think that cryptocurrency is going to be really challenging the dominance of traditional currency. Central banks are issuing their currency, i.e. that is going to be a traditional currency, if you will, an e-Swiss franc, an e-dollar, and so on. Many cryptocurrencies are actually, they derive their value of the utility on the platform that they're being used, i.e. they're not a currency per se per payment. Their currency for a certain utility function. And the last thing I would say is that cryptocurrency issuers do not have any legal or regulatory power, and also no taxing power. So to the extent that states would feel under pressure, they can easily say something is not legal tender, they can tax transactions and so on. So they have this power which others do not have. So that question, I don't see a huge you know, a huge threat.
And there aren't enough cryptocurrencies, not enough value in them. There's that simple fact.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Kieran, last word with you for the day.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think they'll run in parallel. There'll be a lot of technical development around, you know, stable coins and digital currencies. You know, there's a lot of geopolitics around it, but I think there will continue to be a lot of innovation, and they will work in parallel for the time being as an alternative.
Well, thank you all very much for joining us wherever in the world you may be. We've got people over the States and Cayman and lots of people in various European countries. Thank you very much for your contributions, and many thanks to Kieran, to Claire, and to Ilko. As I said in my introduction, we at IFI Global, and particularly our publication, are really getting into this in a big way in the coming months with our governance forum. All subscribers are welcome to chip in and get involved in that and access our research capability, which is developing in this. And we will be shortly going into the field to do some research with investors on what they want to see in terms of governance structures in digital assets. So thank you all very much for joining us, and hopefully see you again before very long. Goodbye, everybody. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you may be. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Thanks.